now on to our guests. Sarah Longwell is the publisher of The Bulwark, which she co-founded in 2019. She is host of the podcast, The Focus Group, which is now in its sixth season, and a trusted voice for the BigTent community. A recognized expert in qualitative research, Sarah has hosted, I think now thousands of focus groups probably, and spoken with thousands of voters nationwide. Her upcoming book, How to Eat an Elephant One Voter at a Time, is being released in September. So if you haven't ordered it already, please do so. Will Sommer is a senior reporter at The Bulwark, where he writes the False Flag newsletter. Excellent, you have to sign up for it. On the right-wing media and online beliefs. Sommer's work focuses on how conspiracy theories and disinformation shape our politics and country, often spilling over from the internet into the real world. He previously worked at the Washington Post and the Daily Beast. He is the author of Trust the Plan, The Rise of QAnon and the Conspiracy That Unhinged America. And with that lighthearted note, I will turn this call over to Sarah and Will. Thank you so much for coming to BigTent. Will, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks everyone for joining BigTent and Sarah and I today. Really happy to be here, and I think there's a lot to dive into, so we'll just get to it. So, Sarah, I think the big news today, obviously, was Todd Blanche's confirmation hearing. I know you were tuned in. What did you make of it?
Boy, guys, this is rough. This should be a layup. Okay, Todd Blanche is wildly unqualified to be the top law enforcement official of the United States of America. This is a guy who has presided over the Epstein cover-up from start to finish, really. I mean, Pam Bondi is gone because of how she handled the Epstein files, because it has become a real problem for the Trump administration. But Bondi was kind of the face, but Blanche has really been as the number two at DOJ. He's been the guy who's been handling it from the jump. So he's the one who went down and interviewed Ghislaine Maxwell and facilitated her moving into Club Fed, where now she gets to hang out with puppies and do Pilates. This is the woman who was procuring young children, girls, underage girls, for America's most notorious pedophile. He's also the person who presided over putting out the documents where he put all of the information of the survivors in there, where now they are getting harassed. It absolutely against protocol, while also ignoring the law that Congress passed, saying that all of the files had to be released. And so he is protecting the people who are the perpetrators while he is exposing the people who are the survivors and the victims. And that's just Epstein. Then there's the IRS slush fund, where Trump was asking for this absurd amount of money from his own government, and then demanding immunity from any further prosecution for him, his friends, or his family, things that we've never seen before. He's also been the lead on the vindictive prosecutions against James Comey and Letitia James. This is not a person he was Trump's personal lawyer. Too. He was Trump's personal defense lawyer. He continues to act as Trump's personal defense lawyer. And all of that, with that sort of the embarrassment of riches in the most negative terms, somehow Democrats couldn't muster a really sort of sticky, effective attack against him. They had two main audiences here. One was Cornyn and one was Tillis. And I think because they thought that they were going to care more about that IRS slush fund, they really focused, the Democrats were focused on those issues. Unfortunately, Tillis and Cornyn, they've kind of already covered this with Todd Blanche, right? They've gotten assurances from him this isn't going forward. They couldn't quite pin him down today on why it's not in writing that none of this will happen, but he was prepared for that part of it. The only time Blanche was made to feel genuinely uncomfortable in this hearing was when Cory Booker started to actually press him on Epstein. Why all of them? I had written a piece for The Bulwark about why the Democrats really should zero in on Epstein, why this is really the main vulnerability for Blanche, but for some reason, they really didn't do it. And so I long thought there was probably only a very small chance they could derail Blanche getting this, because Republicans now they give Trump what he wants in terms of these people, these cabinet members or heads of these agencies. And but I thought there was a small chance if Democrats could really bloody him up, That did not happen today, not even close. And in fact, watching Tillis, Tillis was kind of doing this like, well, the Democrats weaponized the DOJ, so we can't have Republicans also weaponizing the DOJ. So you wouldn't do that, right, sir? This is crazy stuff. Todd Blanche isn't somebody who's like new to this. They're not interviewing him for a job. Cory Booker made this point, and I thought it was a good one. They're interviewing him for a promotion. He's already been in this role. He's already been doing a terrible job in this role. We already know he's weaponizing the government. And so sort of with that level of vulnerability for Blanche, the fact that Democrats really couldn't stick it to him, I was sort of sitting in my seat, losing my mind much of the hearing.
Well, yeah, I mean, to follow that thread you brought up, I mean, how are voters, the voters that you talk about on the focus group podcast, the voters more broadly, how do you think voters are processing the Epstein scandals, kind of the drip, drip, drip? Obviously, Todd Blanche is kind of at the center of a lot of that with the Ghislaine Maxwell interview.
Yeah, this is why I really wanted Democrats to focus on Epstein, because it's one of the few areas, I know that they think their audience is Cornyn and Tillis, but their audience is the American people as much as anything. Like, if you think there's a very small chance that Republicans will actually vote against Blanche, then your best option is to convince the American people that this guy has done terrible things in relationship to the Epstein files. And what I know from listening to voters is that left, right, and center, they really care about the Epstein stuff. And on the Republican side, because Kash Patel and Dan Bongino and every right-wing podcaster spent much of the Biden administration talking about Epstein and how they were going to release all the files and they were going to expose all of these, they presumed Democratic men who participated in this. This had become a focal point for voters, and something that kind of went to the essence of what a lot of Republican voters think about Trump, which is that he was going to be transparent, right? He's not the deep state. He's not going to hide things from them. He's going to show them all of this. And so there really was an opportunity to basically re-elevate the Epstein files, which have gotten lost a little bit. Like, obviously, it was a big story. It was really sticking with people. But the news coverage, it kind of got lost because of the war in Iran, because we've got gas prices have been going up. There's like a million other issues. I don't know. People want to talk about the reflecting pool. I know Will loves to talk about the reflecting pool. But we should never stop talking about Epstein. Blanche didn't want to talk about Epstein. Trump doesn't want to talk about Epstein. But the voters do. The voters care about it. It's something that causes them to lose trust in Trump, something that causes them to lose trust in Blanche. And I don't understand why Democrats didn't focus more on that.
Looking at this hearing, there was a couple 2028 hopefuls who, Cory Booker, possibly John Ossoff. I mean, you mentioned Cory Booker. I mean, did anyone else stand out to you or in terms of people who might run for president?
Well, I got to say Ossoff, who is, he's winning over the heart of Sarah Longwell. Like, I have, I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to lie that I have people who I think are just stronger communicators. And Ossoff, once again today, was demonstrating. He was doing the DNI hearing. Did you watch this, Will? Did you watch any of the DNI hearing?
I watched a little bit of it.
What's that guy's name? Would you remind me? Do you remember? Both of us were like, look at us two journalists.
Jay Solomon?
I don't think so.
Oh God!
But this guy. Here's what Ossoff did. Okay, it's fine. It's fine. We will. This is how we podcast. Right? Usually we're sitting there being like, wait, I can't remember this particular name. So this was not Clayton. Thank you.
Yes, Jay Clayton. Thank you.
Thank you, commenter. Smart.
Sorry, you should be up here. Thank you.
Well, but because we were all paying attention to Blanche, we weren't focused on the DNI hearing. But of course, the Blanche hearing, you can always tell what bubbles up and what landed because of what gets distributed on social media. We're seeing very few clips of the Blanche hearing because they weren't able to pin him down on very much. But John Ossoff at the DNI hearing asked a very simple question. Sir, can you say whether or not the 2020 election was stolen? And the guy, Clayton's like, I'm not getting into that with you, sir. And he was like, it's a simple question. Just can you tell us whether or not the 2020 election was stolen? And Jay Clayton just pauses, stops, like can't answer, won't answer. And that's how you do it. And so, I just think it was interesting to see. I mean, like Amy Klobuchar today, look, I like Amy Klobuchar. I often think she's effective, especially she's a lawyer by background, so she can usually be good in these hearings. She was not today. But Ossoff was the best one. Unfortunately, he wasn't in the Blanche hearing. But he does have like a quite a good sense of how you drill down and get somebody to the thing that they don't want to answer. And so that's the clip you're seeing today.
Yeah, and that's really worth watching. I think it seems like so much of the strategy from these nominees is to avoid providing a soundbite. And so you see them saying things like, well, we talked about that in your office. And then the senator says, okay, well, like, can we talk about it here? And so it seems like the best option is to pin them into this kind of weird silence. Pulling back the lens a little bit, I mean, obviously you look at voter data, you look at these focus groups so much. How are voters processing these endless stream of Trump scandals, whether it's the corruption, the bumbling, all these things, and which of these scandals is standing out to voters?
Yeah. So as I've said, like the reason I want him to focus on Epstein is because the voters still bring up Epstein in the focus groups unprompted. You're like, if you just ask people questions like, well, Trump voters, what would you like to see Trump do? Very often they will say, release the Epstein files. Um, that being said, the endless litigation, the tit for tat, man, do voters not register like the back and forth. Nobody, that's why the social media clips end up being important. And it's why I get so frustrated when Democrats and Republicans, they all do this. They want themselves to be the clip. And so they grandstand as opposed to really like getting the better of the person that they're questioning and having that be the clip. Because the voters are not going to follow like, and they can't follow. They're not lawyers and they're not political obsessives or sickos like all of us. We are great people who like follow this stuff because we care about it. We're a little bit deranged. The average American is not, right? Right now they are watching the soccer game. If they, they're watching the World Cup game or, they're picking up their kids, they've just got other things to think about. And so they don't follow the machinations. And it's very easy for voters to sort of hear what Republicans are doing, which is to say, well, the Biden, administration did this or that, and they just kind of do like an a pox on both their houses, which is a very common frame for especially swing voters to say, well, both sides do it. Both sides are politicize everything. I hate it, but they don't see the unique threat and they don't see how Trump is unique because for me, for example, simply the idea that you would make Trump's former defense attorney, the guy who defended him in these legal cases, his personal attorney, the head of the Department of Justice, an independent agency. That alone is insane. But voters don't know that. They really don't. And so I've always tried to explain the way that this stuff tends to become a little bit of white noise for them unless something can really jump out and grab them. And as much as this is a little bit gross, the fact is part of the reason that the Epstein stuff lands, and one of the reasons you find a lot of the big cultural issues that people get into, whether it's trans stuff or abortion, it's because they're issues that average people feel like they can have an opinion on without knowing a ton of stuff. And they can feel like I can morally have an opinion on this. So people have that on Epstein, right? They're like, Epstein was a pedophile and that's bad. Whereas the slush fund, IRS, how Trump is using it, the average voter often doesn't understand that. And I know that we wish they would, but in this new media environment where people are not seeking out their news from really smart columnists in terms of how they get informed, but instead just seeing, things as they scroll by on social media, it all just becomes this blur of stuff and it doesn't jump out if it's not something that they can sort of grab onto emotionally.
Well, speaking of things to grab onto emotionally, it strikes me that we're facing this rise of like this explosive diarrhea virus, and this strikes me as like kind of a classic quality of life issue in the food supply. And do you think there's anything Democrats could do with that, with these kind of like things that are kind of like nitty gritty oversight things, but that strike me as actually mattering to people?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is what my book is about. My book is really a book about communications and about how Democrats can be more effective at going on offense. And this again, speaking of gross, like what's gross about the whole what's the name? It's like what's the back?
Cyclopariasis or something along those lines?
There's a horrible bacteria that is giving people severe gastro distress, right? And why is this happening? Well, one reason is that Trump in cutting so many of the agencies that he did through Doge is that we don't have somebody looking and like taking care of this stuff the way he once did. Now, look, could this maybe have happened under any administration? Maybe, but the story that you can put together for people is Trump cut a bunch of things from the government that would have been tracking this, and now we've got this horrible outbreak. You might get catastrophic gastro distress if you have a salad. And like, why did Trump do this? Why aren't Republicans paying more attention? Why did they cut these things out of the government? That's a story you can tell to voters, but it requires a kind of um, relentless pushing forward of this information, assigning blame. Republicans are very good at this, regardless of whether it's true. They know how to create a narrative and say, it's Joe Biden's fault that this is happening. And Democrats both struggle to do this, clearly. Again, I'll go back to John Ossoff as somebody who I think is really good at this. But also part of the reason is it is hard in this information environment to do it because Trump, look, the way that Republicans are able to make a meal out of Hunter Biden and say, the Biden crime family, and they pour over it and they talk about it over and over and over again, and Hunter Biden's laptop, right? They did that because that's one scandal, a scandal of sort of quite minimal proportion. Trump has so many scandals. Like, even when I did my wind up on Blanche, it's a lot. There's a lot of stuff there. And so I think that Democrats sometimes collapse under the sheer weight of scandal in terms of figuring out how to tag on to the 1, 2, or 3, or wrap them into it. This is what Ossoff does. Ossoff does a version of storytelling where he takes a bunch of the things that are happening and weaves them into a narrative where you can tell a story to voters about the corruption, about what Trump's doing. That takes good communicators. Democrats have a couple of them. Pete Buttigieg is one as well. But as a total group, they really struggle in the day-to-day with this.
It's a lot to keep track of. Speaking of scandals, what do you think of the main Senate race now that Graham Plattner has dropped out? Are Democrats doomed? Is there a way to turn this around?
They're not doomed. This is the best thing that's happened to Maine Democrats. I mean, I think Graham Plattner was an incredibly risky bet. And the more stuff that was coming out, like by the time that you had the amount of stuff that was coming out on him, that was before Republicans had unloaded their oppo. Like, this is all before Susan Collins, whatever they had in the tank, had come out. And so I think, they're going to hold the way that my understanding, I'm not, an expert on Maine's nominating processes, but they have sort of a 500 delegate group that comes together. They will pick from a series of candidates. Most of them are people who ran for governor recently, and they'll pick one. I think that there are better candidates and worse candidates among that group, but I do think that if they can find somebody who's a good communicator, there's a real appetite to defeat Susan Collins in Maine. Like, I have done so many focus groups in Maine, the amount of stuff they were willing to swallow from Graham Plattner because they so desperately wanted to defeat Susan Collins. I've never seen quite this kind of appetite. And so if they can just nominate somebody who can sort of carry this forward, I do think she's still beatable. But it's tough. Democrats have sort of got to break the cycle of, here's what I'll say for Democrats. They make the right decision after they've exhausted all the wrong decisions and often at the very last minute. That is still infinitely preferable to Republicans who do not make the right decision at any point. Right? They're just like, they're going to barrel right ahead with Ken Paxton, all of his scandals be damned. But they've put themselves into a pickle just timing wise. Like, for example, in Maine, you guys may have heard about this. It was yesterday or the day before. I'm sorry. ICE is killing a lot of people right now. And so it's difficult to keep all of the stories straight. And I am a professional political observer. And so think about how hard it is for the average American. But an ICE agent killed a person in Maine. And it would have been wrong even if they had gotten the person they were looking for, but it wasn't the person that they were looking for. They killed an immigrant, and people are out in front of Susan Collins's office. Sure would be nice. So Susan Collins did this thing where she called Mark Wayne Mullen, who now runs the Department of Homeland Security. He took over for Kristi Noem. And she called him, and we've got to stop these traffic stops, because this is what was happening. Is they're sort of wantonly stopping people at these traffic stops. And when people either try to run or, whatever, then they shoot them. And so she said, we got to stop these traffic stops. And so for one day, they said they would. And then Trump reversed it. He came out and he said, no, we're not going to stop these traffic stops. It would be great if we had a Democrat in Maine who was able to prosecute this case against Susan Collins right now. And so the absence of that is costing them something. I still don't think it's costing them as much as ultimately Graham Plattner would have cost them.
You mentioned the ICE shootings, all these ICE killings we've seen recently. How do you think voters are processing that? I mean, that strikes me as when it happened in Minneapolis, it was something that kind of really shook the Trump administration and DHS. Is this something that kind of reaches beyond people who are already politically active?
So we did a group of swing voters in swing states the night after both the two shootings. Nobody'd heard about either one of them.
Wow.
And so, and look, this is one of the depressing things about listening to voters all of the times, but also one of the illuminating things for me. One of the biggest lessons is not what do voters think about this or that, but what even penetrates? What do they know? What have they heard about? And they hadn't heard about these because they feel like localized issues, I think, is one reason. The other reason, and this is distinct from the shootings of Renee Good and Alex Preddy, I think there's two distinctions that are worth noting. One is with Preddy and with Good, they were both Americans. They were both white. And they were caught on tape. That's the other big distinction, right? Everyone saw it because the tape made everybody decide to go look for themselves and form an opinion on what they were seeing, like a Rorschach test. Whereas neither of these shootings were caught on tape. And so Americans don't see the shooting. They're not able with their own eyes to evaluate them. And so in the case of Good and Preddy, Americans were able to know, they knew that DHS and Kristi Noem were lying about those shootings because they could see them. And just the fact that there was controversy over sort of what people were seeing, because the hard partisans were taking different positions on the shootings, like did Renee Good drive toward the ICE officer? What was the angle? Remember, everybody was doing that. I think absent that, someone says there's footage from Observer in his car of the shooting of Maine. Is there? Because
the footage I've seen is a little more distant. It's not as sort of like close up as like the Renee Good or the Preddy shooting. Yeah,
because when I was trying to find like evidence of it, I was trying to watch it, and the video that I saw was just that it was in somebody's kitchen. The shots were taking place out on the road. You didn't see anything, but there was a cat. Like, so you're just looking into somebody's kitchen, and there's a cat sitting there, and you hear the bullets. And I was like, well, this doesn't teach me anything other than the cat didn't jump off the table when the bullets fired. And so I just think those are reasons why what happened in Minnesota sort of captured the imagination of the country in a way that these haven't hit the same way. And people feel different. Look, it is not a pretty thing, and I'm not justifying it, but I do think it's a reality that when seeing Americans get shot in the street for protesting is something that I think a lot of Americans felt very viscerally, where being told that, these people were fleeing or could have been a danger to ICE officers and people can't really see what's happening, and they are immigrants. I think that changes how voters interpret it. And when I was when I did the focus group and I was asking people about it, I was like, so we explained it to them. Here's what happened. And you do get a lot of people who sort of live in this gray area. They're kind people, and they're trying to wrestle with it in a decent way. And they say, look, law enforcement, which of course ICE is sort of different from that, but they think like this is a hard job. I'm glad I don't have this job. But they live between the two extremes, most Americans, where they say the excesses of what Trump is doing, the deportation of the Gardner, because somebody said Gardner in the focus group, who's been here for 30 years, they don't want that guy deported. But they also want the border closed and don't want people here illegally, especially people who are criminals, right? This is what sort of swing voters bring up all the time, is like, well, we want people to come here. We want them to come the right way. I call that the moral alibi in the book, because I really talk about immigration in the book around the way that voters sort of deal with this. And most of them live in this kind of spot where they say, I want people to come the right way. But as Americans, they've never gone through the immigration system. They have no idea what the right way is. So they just sort of think, come the right way, do it the fair way, don't jump the line from somebody else. You shouldn't be here illegally, but also look, if somebody's been here 30 years and they've got kids here, like let's not be terrible to them. Let's not deport them. We don't want that to happen, but they also very much want the border closed. And so it's complicated in that way.
So we are about to pivot. We got some great list of questions. I got one more from myself. What is a surprising trend, something voters care about that you were surprised by? What has surprised you from the focus groups?
All the AI stuff. This is coming up
Mm.
all the time. Data centers have become a bipartisan, um, like angry point. I was actually at home. I'm from central Pennsylvania, a pretty rural part. And so it's a pretty red area. And everywhere I saw these signs, like the homemade, not homemade, but like the little ones, that were all saying, no new centers, fight the data centers. And I hear it in all of the groups. And it really started coming up when we were doing focus groups last year during Abigail Spanberger and Mikey Sherrill's races. So in Virginia and in New Jersey, I was like, the dominant issue are the data centers. But it is, and it touches on a bunch of different things, both environmental concerns that I would say the left has, but also, a lot of people are very worried about their jobs and being displaced. And so you get this dual thing where number one, people feel like it's happening to them, like they don't get a say in it. There's a lot of places where the town is voting against the data centers and the data centers are still getting built. And so there's like the data center part, and then there's what the data centers represent, which is people feel like a threat to their livelihoods, their jobs, and also what their kids are learning and how information is happening. And so there's just a lot of anxiety around AI. And this actually has a lot to do with why voters want younger candidates. It's people I think sometimes say like, yes, people want younger candidates because they want people who are fresh and new and spry and have energy. But actually, I think it has a lot to do with the fact that voters are currently trying to make sense of a new world that involves a lot around cryptocurrency, that involves a lot around AI and how that's going to impact jobs. And they want people who understand these new technological realities that we're living in. And they look at the older candidates and think, you don't know what we're dealing with right now with all this stuff. And I think that is a big through line.
So let's dive into questions. We've got a lot of good ones. Let's do a fun one. We've been talking
Yes,
about
let's
some
do a
heavy
fun one.
issues. Why is it that do you think that people, including myself, as you said, were so interested in the reflecting pool? What is it about that story that broke through? And, what other stories like that do you think could break through to voters?
So every now and then, I think sometimes just a metaphor arrives. And, the reflecting pool somehow became this real metaphor for Trump's incompetence and also his corruption, right? This was a situation where they had sweetheart deals to some weird people to drain the pool and refill it. And Trump himself, and again, this is just like Epstein. The media, the Democrats, they didn't make the reflecting pool a big issue. They're not the ones who made Epstein a big issue. Republicans and Trump made these things big issues. And so Trump was talking about his reflecting pool all the time. He kept inviting the media in, and he had made a big poster board where it was like the Washington Monument and I don't know, the Sears Tower or whatever the big one is in New York. And it was like stacked up next to the reflecting pool because Trump's obsessed with size. And so he was like, look how big the reflecting pool is relative to these buildings. He like, stood it on its side. And so Trump was obsessed with the reflecting pool and talking to people about the things that he was doing. And on top of, so somebody, I think Kitty just threw this in. It's also on top of the East Wing. Like it's one of those stories that's kind of building on itself where, so he destroyed the East Wing. He's building this arch, he's building this ballroom with donor money. And so it became this encapsulation of something that people were already tapped into. I mean, the number one way to build a story is not necessarily to introduce something new, but to introduce something that people are already feeling, which is Trump is overly focused on the reflecting pool and the ballroom and all of these things that he wants to put his name on over lowering prices for the average American, which is what they want him focused on. And then he obsesses about them. And then there are these disasters And so then they're also, um, there's corruption everywhere around them. And so it sort of becomes like a narrative that you're like, oh, this all works together in a lot of different ways. And that's like you can tell a good story about that because I don't think voters actually care about the reflecting pool, qua reflecting pool. Trust me, nobody's waking up in the morning being like, man, I hope the reflecting pool's okay. But it becomes a metaphor for something bigger.
Great. Here's I for one, I worry about the reflecting pool whether it's okay, but maybe not a lot of people. Let me grab another great question here from the focus groups that you're doing. What are you seeing in terms of obviously you do a lot on people who have voted for Trump, whether it's kind of hardcore multi-time Trump voters, people who have only voted for Trump once or twice. What do you see as the state of the MAGA movement, the coalition right now?
Yeah, that's a good question. So a couple things. Number one, and I need to say this because it is the most important thing. Like there's a great deal of frustration and buyer's remorse around voting for Trump, especially for a lot of the Biden to Trump voters. And you know, I think for people like all of us who really are focused on democracy and really care about the state of our democracy, it's a tough pill to swallow to say, actually, a lot of voters just voted for Trump because prices were too high and Joe Biden was old. And it's kind of that simple. So they hired Trump because Trump promised to lower prices on day one. And he promised no new wars. Prices have not come down. Inflation is still high. If you look at Trump's approval ratings, where is he sucking wind the most? It's on inflation, it's on cost of living, and it's on Iran and foreign policy. And so I think that there's a lot of disappointment in Trump not being able to handle those basic issues that he was hired to handle. That's number one. But then the MAGA movement, and I want you to tell me what you think about this, Will, because I've got a thesis on this, a theory that I put forward. But I'm watching voters in the MAGA movement start to kind of cleave off in two different directions. And one is what I'll call the America Firsters. And let's say these are kind of Tucker Carlson. This is Marjorie Taylor Greene. These are people who are really upset that Trump has launched this war with Iran. They are the people who are saying we shouldn't be doing anything overseas because America First is about investing everything here at home. They want them focused on prices, on jobs, on things for Americans. And then there's what I'll call the MAGA establishment. And this is Marco Rubio. This is Mike Johnson. And this is kind of like Republican voters who are, they're pro-Trump, but they're not, they're maybe not quite, they're culty in the sense that the MAGA establishment just does whatever Trump says. But it is still kind of tethered to the Republican Party and the institution in general. And I see those going a different way. Like you've seen Tucker Carlson say he no longer supports Donald Trump. Nick Fuentes is like a white nationalist who also I would put in this America First category, but for like, although, Tucker's a big anti-Semite and so is Marjorie Taylor Greene, but like they're in this other category where they're breaking from Trump. And so JD Vance was really hoping he could sort of hold this coalition together, but it is fracturing apart right now, bound together by only one thing, which is hatred of Democrats. And I think that if Democrats could, this is why I wrote the book, is I think that there is a really unique opportunity, not so much in 2026, but going into 2028. I think it's our sort of last best chance to build a strong pro-democracy coalition or a strong, broad political coalition and win back a lot of those people who voted for Trump for sort of economic reasons. And sort of take advantage of the fact that there is a fracturing in the MAGA coalition. And we don't really know right now that there's an heir to Trump that can hold it together the way that Trump can.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right on there about that split between sort of MAGA and America First. I mean, I think for a lot of these people who are not just like completely mainlining Fox every day, I think they're looking at Trump and they're kind of like, this guy's kind of like old and busted. It's getting a little boring. I mean, I'm obsessed with this the primetime address tomorrow that's supposed to prove that China stole the election because a lot of my characters are involved in it. But I
Who
think
is
if
it?
you're
China?
someone,
China stole it? That's who stole it?
it's, well, possibly Venezuela too, but I think there's a lot of evidence that it's going to be based on something we've seen before, which is the idea that China got fake mail-in ballots from TikTok. Now, you might notice a flaw in this theory, which is that TikTok doesn't have your address and doesn't really have a way to get mail-in ballots. But I think that is the idea that's going to be kind of revived.
This is just a good thing worth touching on really quickly, just as we're talking about trends that we're about to see going into 2026, which is right. So we are at war with Iran, like a hot war now that has got we launched more attacks today. It has been off and on. They've been unable to negotiate a deal. Trump only did that memorandum of understanding because he really wanted it for his 250th, cage match on the lawn of the White House. But this is all going. I thought when I saw he was going to do an address to the nation that it might be about Iran, but it's not. It's not about something of real national significance that people care about. It's going to be about the 2020 election being stolen because Donald Trump has been trying to lay the predicate to say that the 2026 election is stolen should they lose the House and or the Senate. And this is part of this. This is part of this effort right now. What we're seeing is to try to relitigate 2020 and manufacture some proof, despite the fact that all of these were hand counted back then. Like nothing. Sometimes you hear this from MAGA voters. They're like, no one even looked. And I'm like, the 2020 election was the most scrutinized election in American history. We did recounts in all the swing states, many of them by hand. Remember the like, what were they? The bamboo ninjas?
Yes, the bamboo fibers on the ballots that proved they were made in China.
That's right.
Yeah, and this was a group called Cyber Ninjas. Yeah.
The cyber ninjas. Thank you.
Yeah.
See, you
Incredible
forget
outfit.
you forget these things, but they were big deals for a while. And so he is at the bare minimum, trying to throw doubt into the outcome of the 2026 election, and at worst, looking for ways to actively interfere with it.
Let's get into some questions we got from the audience that are kind of on a practical voter persuasion. You're an expert at voter persuasion. Do you have advice that you would give to someone who is trying to get concerned friends off the sidelines to do more to help swing close midterm elections? I'm not sure if that means getting someone who's not voting to vote, getting someone who's voting to, volunteer their time or what have you. But how, if you're trying to convince someone to get more engaged, what would you say?
I mean, there's a lot of different things I would say. One thing that when I wrote the book was less of a problem than it is now, that I'm quite worried about with Democrats, is that they're engaged in an enormous factional fight between like what they're saying is the center left establishment and the sort of progressives that want to fight harder and are pushing on issues like Medicare for all, and Israel, which has become just this big cleavage point among Democratic voters. And I guess one of my big pieces of advice is to ask people to stop that. Like, don't engage in it and focus on Republicans. I swear, if these hardcore progressives and if these both sides are at fault here, if people would put half as much energy into fighting Republicans as they put into fighting with each other, they would get a lot further in fighting Republicans. I am convinced that the durability of the bulwark and the reason that the bulwark remains something that people become attached to and the reason our audience grows is because we know who the bad guys are. And we are focused on the way that Republicans are destroying America right now, American liberal democracy, like all of our institutions, whereas Democrats really are engaged in this factional fight. And so I would sort of urge people to say, let's focus on like the real bad guys. That's one piece of advice I would have. The other one is, and look, I understand people ask me this question a lot where it's sort of like, well, what they want to be able to like take the family member or the friend who either doesn't seem to care or has been sucked into MAGA and like dissuade them of that. That's a tall order because that's really specific to every person you're dealing with. And whoever that is in your life, that person comes with a lot of particulars and it's wrapped up in your relationship with them. This is much more about how do Democrats achieve narrative dominance? How do they learn to stick to issues? And I think again, it kind of always goes back to how do you go on offense rather than wringing your hands over like this or that. I watched it happen today with Blanche. Democrats needed to go for the jugular. And so I think what people need to do is say, guys, we know who the bad guys are and we've got to focus on that. And you've got to assume, I hope, that the people who aren't engaged, who are saying, oh, well, they're just all the same, a pox on both their houses. No, Donald Trump, just talk about all the lies. Like, focus on Trump and what he has done. Focus on the fact that gas prices are going up. He said he wasn't going to start a war with Iran, and he did. Like, we're at war. We're in a forever war probably now with Iran. He's destabilizing the Middle East. Are your prices lower? Have your prices gone down at all, friend? They haven't. And so, again, it is just, I encourage you, the person who is thinking about doing the persuading, to take an offensive posture and really try to say, like, this is the only way we're going to make a difference. Because I think people are starting to be like, what am I supposed to do? Just vote harder? And the answer is yes. Yeah, it is. I'm sorry. That is what it is in a democracy. Oh, okay. And also, if you want to, I think that people think like, oh man, I write letters to my senators. You should still do that. You should demand that your Democratic elected officials fight harder. Like, why are there? I just want to make something clear. The voters are not becoming Democratic voters are not becoming more socialist. They're not. They are more open today than they've ever been to America reevaluating its relationship with Israel. That is absolutely true. That's just something I hear from voters all the time. Like, the Democrats' litmus test of the cycle is around AIPAC funding. They just use AIPAC as like a stand-in for everything that they don't like. And the reason that the DSA left is gaining traction is because the center left, or the establishment, has created a vacuum of leadership. And I think demanding leadership from Democrats, just say, like, talk to us more, be out there more. Like, everybody's in a fetal position and they got to get out of it.
Great. Let me pull up my, sorry, you covered a lot of questions we had coming up.
I'm
People had
sorry,
questions
yeah.
about DSA, about Israel. No, I think
I can
it's
do
great.
more on Israel.
Well, I mean, to that point, someone asked a question about the people who support cutting American funding to Israel, saying that this is a widely popular idea. I'd be interested in your thoughts on, like, the politics of Israel and how big each constituency is.
I don't have the polling at my fingertips, but the swing among Americans, not just Democrats, but Americans overall, especially under the age of 40, who now no longer support Israel, is wild. It is really big. It is not a small thing. I will, while I am here to say that the extent to which Democratic voters are becoming more socialist is wildly overstated, it is not overstated how frustrated both Democratic voters and Republican voters under 40 now are about America's relationship with Israel. And I think whoever runs in 2028 on the Democratic side, my fervent hope, and again, I'll go back to somebody like John Ossoff, like, I just would not be shocked at all if you ended up with, like, that the way that Democrats square this particular, or like get over this wedge, is by nominating a Jewish person who is very critical of Netanyahu and Israel. And I think that when I've been talking to voters about Israel, and it comes up all the time, they are in the main, not, they are very quick to separate Jewish Americans from Israel. A lot of it has to do with people under the age of, I don't know, if you're like 35, Netanyahu's been in charge of Israel for a very long time. And people see Netanyahu as a Trump-like figure. And so, like, there's a way in which American politics is being imputed onto Israel that is creating, like, a real hostility toward Netanyahu. So voters don't want us being America, to sort of uncritically send money. Like, and people actually know more about this issue than they do about a lot of other issues. And so they even distinguish between sending money for Israel's defense, which you'll get a lot more people saying they support, than sending them money for sort of money that can be used against the Palestinians, or to continue to wage war. And people have, like, there's like a strain of Democrat where they use the word genocide as a litmus test. Like, you have to say it's genocide. And then there's other strains that are like, this is really complicated. What's been going on in the Middle East has been going on for a long time. I just want us to, I want America to be less tethered. And there's like a real America first component too. They're like, why are we spending money over here? The war in Iran has just made this issue a big deal for voters, right? Where they see a personal consequence for us being engaged in Iran because of what they see as Netanyahu's influence. And they want stuff like that to stop because they're like, America has no business doing that. And so this is going to be an enormous 2028 issue.
So, Sarah, we have another question that I think you're going to like. Can Sarah tell us a bit about her book? Now, that's How to Eat an Elephant, One Voter at a Time, coming out in September.
Here's the thing. I know that you guys probably get a lot of people talking to you about their books, and I'm not in a position to sit here and say my book is more special than anybody else's book. I will say I felt I didn't want to write this book. Like I wasn't like, man, do I want to write a book? It was that I felt like I had a really strong, desperate desire to take because at this point now I've been doing focus groups since 2018 very consistently. There are so many things I have heard from voters that I thought needed a much bigger package, like where we didn't just say, okay, well, what do they think about this race or what do they think about Israel? I wanted to weave together what the voters want out of our politics. I wanted to explain who swing voters are and how you reach them. I wanted to tell my own personal story because I get a lot of the same questions over and over again. Sarah, you're a lesbian and you were a Republican all that time. How did that happen? I would like to know that story. Wait a minute. You once worked for Rick Santorum? Like, there was a lot of that stuff that I was like, you know what? I'm just going to put this all down. How did I become a Republican? Because I also get, I think fairly in the scrum of everything, people are like, well, you built this. And I'm a little bit like, well, I was born in 1980 and I went through Reagan and H.W. Bush, who, whether you like them or dislike them from their politics, like we were dealing with normal politics. And then we went to Clinton, who, when I was 18, I was raised in sort of character counts conservatism. I was from a small town in central Pennsylvania. And he was sleeping with a girl who was not just like 3 years older than I was, and who was an intern. And then he was lying about it to the American people. And that, I think everybody's politics. So part of it is like, as I listen to voters, I think about myself and how one forms a political identity, because I also think a lot about polarization and how we get dug in. And my political identity was formed by the time I grew up in, right? And the things that happened then. And then John McCain came along, who I thought was a quite compelling figure, and which is the thing that ultimately made me say, like, okay, I'm with the Republican Party. And then we had 8 years of Obama, and then there's Trump. And so, and then as soon as Trump came along, I was like, I'm out. I want to fight to oppose him. And I started doing the focus groups. And I talk about why I started doing the focus groups, how we were trying to primary Donald Trump, how I was trying to get Mark Cuban or Larry Hogan to run against him, and how I got so addicted to listening to voters, because you sit around when Donald Trump happens and you spend a lot of time going, how does this happen? How did this world come to be? And I wanted to sort of try to illuminate that, because I feel like I got those answers when I started listening to voters. There were all these moments when sort of the scales fell from my eyes around, like I said, I remember I start one of the chapters with this, where I was in Columbus, Ohio in the early days of the focus groups. And it was the day that Donald Trump stood on the stage with Vladimir Putin and sided against America's intelligence community. And as somebody who was a big never Trumper, there was a big meltdown in Washington, D.C. He had just overturned 80 years of American foreign policy in terms of our relationship to Russia. He was kind of starting to walk it back by saying he hadn't said what he thought, what he had actually said, and he was trying to reverse it. Paul Ryan was freaking out. All the Republicans were freaking out. And I thought, I cannot wait for this focus group tonight. They're going to be so mad about this. Like, these voters they're going to be shocked that Trump did this. I walked into that focus group. I had two, because I would have to, at that time I was having to fly everywhere. And so we were in Columbus, and I was behind the glass, and the moderator started asking them. Nobody had any idea what he was talking about. And that was such a important moment for me to know what captured people's imagination and what didn't. And even when we explained it to them, it was a lot like the shooting the shootings that just happened with ICE, where we kind of explained it to them and people weren't really that invested in it. And so they kind of took a middle ground. Well, I could see this or I could see this. Hey, he's got to go meet with foreign leaders. That's his job. It's just learning about the American voter is cheat code for understanding American politics. And in some ways, certain things that we think of as really complicated are actually really easy. And some of the things that we think should be obvious and easy are actually quite complicated. And so in the book, I tell a lot of these personal stories. I talk about how I came to the work, what it taught me in the beginning, why I thought Trump's rise happened, why his durability happened, what I think we can do about it going forward. Like, I wrote the book because I think we're at this seminal moment where there is a fracture in the MAGA coalition. I think Trump is a unique figure that cannot be replicated among Republicans, but Democrats are going to have to get their shit together. And it's also a book about communications, about how you communicate effectively, what I learned about communications, what I learned about offense, what I learned about the differences. I have had, I think there's probably only a handful of people in the country who have been an operative on both the Republican side and the Democratic side. So I've been inside the rooms of both of these groups. There's a chapter called Republicans are from Mars, Democrats are from Venus. They are so different. The cultures are so different. The way that they approach advocacy is so different. The way they build their campaigns and their efforts is so different. And so there is just, it ended up, I thought it was I could get it to be short, but it's about 330 pages. But I will tell you this, it's good. I've read it a couple of times. It's good. And it really goes to like how Trump was able to weaponize immigration and how Democrats are going to have to think about immigration, how Democrats are going to have to tackle the issues around people want to know how their prices are going to get lowered. Like anybody who's on this call right now, anyone who's on this call, you are not, I bet, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, I guess I shouldn't assume, but I believe it is probably not true that you have to decide whether you drive to see your family 3 hours away and spend the money on the gas to do that, or pay for shoes for your kid. But one of the things that it really did pull me out of my bubble, not my political bubble, but my life bubble, was to listen to voter after voter talk about trying to afford healthcare, or listening to them talk about their personal struggle to afford this or that, or to think about whether their wife could stay home or not stay home, or women who said, I don't know what to do if I work. My salary just goes to pay for childcare. Like, people grappling with these things, they would like leaders who would talk about this stuff. And I just desperately wanted to share what I have heard from all of these voters and the way that I think it fits together into a strategy for Democrats to achieve both a narrative dominance and then a political dominance that can end the MAGA moment once and for all. But it's going to take some changing. And so that's what the book's about.
Well, thank you, Sarah and Will. This was a great conversation, just so engaging, interesting, and timely. We so appreciate your time and everything that you do at the Bulwark, and everything that you do for our country. We're truly grateful to both of you and to the Bulwark. We need you. And so thanks for coming to BigTent and keeping up the fight. And everyone, go grab Sarah's book when it comes out, but pre-order it. That really helps her make the New York Times bestseller list, as I've learned, and we need to get her there, number one. And Will, we're going to get you back to BigTent because we need to understand the right better. Your work is unparalleled, and I've been following you since 2020, and I really appreciate what you've done in sort of peeling back, or the scales dropping from our eyes, as Sarah said. A lot of love for both of you in the chat. So I hope you'll both come back to BigTent soon. And everyone, keep up the fight. Call your senators. Although the Democrats boged on the Todd Blanche going for the jugular, let's not just sit back. Let's go for the jugular ourselves and call our senators and do the things we have to do to save our country. And everyone, that have a great night, and everyone, go enjoy your family. World Cup soccer. We have to have fun while we're doing this hard work. So good night, everyone. Thanks for coming to BigTent.
Thanks,
Thanks,
guys.
everyone.